Welcome to the Something Blue Fan Who Review. This is an ongoing series on the Something Blue channel where I, Jed T.E. Rhodes, master of my fate, captain of my soul, and pretentious git like no other, will review Doctor Who fan content, be it fan films or fan audios. Today, we return to the halcyon days of the wilderness years with the epic story Masterplan from the Projection Room. The Projection Room guys worked very hard to make some very good content, and I've also been in pubs with them, which makes objectively reviewing things very hard because that might be a rather awkward pub conversation if I ever run into them again. If I hated Masterplan. Oops! Just gave the whole game away there. Masterplan was an early 2000s story where a lot of the plot threads the Projection Room had been laying the foundations of since their founding got resolved. This after a decade of classic-style serials of increasingly high production quality, scale, ambition, and general resemblance of the classic series itself. This particular serial has the dual advantages of being considerably more polished than any of their previous efforts, and considerably more ambitious than any of their previous efforts, and trust me, the word considerably is doing enough heavy lifting there that Superman would work up a sweat trying to carry it. The general plot involves the Master, obviously, as embodied by the deliciously camptastic and bold Phil Newton in England, convincing an army of Cybermen and an army of Daleks to work together to take down their greatest nemesis, the Doctor, as played, initially, by Chris Hoyle. You may contain your surprise at this truly original and stunning plot at your leisure, but all joking aside, this was actually a rare feat to accomplish in fan films at the time when this film was made. Modern films may make stories with armies of Cybermen, Daleks, and other monsters about as often as the average viewer has hot dinners these days, but in those days, this was an achievement, in bold font and underlined for extra emphasis. Saying too much about the story's story would require a lengthy explanation of the very dense plot of this serial. Indeed, the first serious criticism one might have of this story is that it is immensely packed, so much so that a sardine might look at it and think it a tight squeeze. We have payoffs for a collection of arcs, take a deep breath. There's the Chris Hoyle Doctor's broken TARDIS, the Time Crystal, first thing in the Projection Room's first ever piece, the Crystal of Acheron. The Master's plans are a direct continuation of efforts they made in previous stories. This story is a direct sequel to a previous story, A Stage in Time. There's a companion introduction, technically two, multiple plots being plotted, multiple characters doing the plotting, and that's not to mention being a proper take on the abortive first version of this story, The Deadly Alliance. And another deep breath. There's also gun battles, deaths galore, unexpected and possibly unwelcome if you're squeamish, gore, assassins with cool eye patches a whole decade before Moffat made them cool, witty repartee, and a host of other bits and bobs going on that mean that these 4 episodes never feel padded, barring one plot point that is discussed in a moment. Short of literally throwing a kitchen sink in the episode, and frankly I wouldn't be surprised if I missed one somewhere, there's not much they could have put in this story. Oh, and lest we forget, there's also a regeneration. Yep, spoiler warning all you folks who think spoiling a 2 decades old fan film is bad form, but Chris Hoyle's Doctor, after 4 and a bit stories, counting the Deadly Alliance, fucking dies! Right at the start of the second episode, no less. This is, depending on your perspective, either an utterly bonkers and inspired choice that elevates Masterplan to Masterful, or an utterly bonkers and stupid choice that creates an entire episode dedicated to post-regen shenanigans, which could otherwise have been 2 minutes of train montage. Thankfully, said shenanigans are not massively overdone. This isn't the post-2005 era, where it seems that every regeneration story has the Doctor twatting around in their predecessor's coat, barfing gold CGI, and generally making a tit of themselves for most of the runtime, before speechifying and beating the monster with the power of their ego. And if, dear audience, you think I'm talking about yours specifically, I'm not, but it's very interesting if you think I am. No, the new Doctor, played by Gordon England, gets into it fairly sharpish, minus a little bit of obligatory twatting around in the costume that is happily lacking in Matt Smith impersonations, mainly because Matt Smith would have been a teenager at the time this was made. Let's go back to Chris Hoyle's fucking death for a minute, and yes, I'm going to keep calling it that. Any story where a Doctor fucking dies had better be one of the best stories that Doctor ever gets. Is this the case for Chris Hoyle? Well, no. Candidly, it's not as character-focused as the later piece The Schrödinger Effect. Yes, I said later because fan Doctors never die, motherfuckers. It's not as mysterious as The Crystal of Acheron, though it is a great deal sharper in its writing. It's not as blatantly fun as A Stitch in Time. But, and this is important, it is good. The Doctor gets to do all sorts of doctory things. There's speeches, tinkering with the TARDIS, a car chase, and of course, the heroic and defiant final scene with him, in which the Doctor again fucking dies! Just wish his actual last words weren't, "I won't die, just regenerate." A touch underwhelming for a version of the Doctor that was 6 years old at that point. Though it should be noted that this was, again, the halcyon classic era, where epic final lines and speeches hadn't yet become the cliché. The illustrious Benedetti Doctor, for example, didn't get a final line at all. She was just shot, but we'll get to that when we review Broken Doors one of these days. The serial serves the companions less well. It's technically the introduction episodes for Flynn, Susan Gibson, and Devlin, Mark Ellis. Devlin actually gets introduced, though in true timey-wimey fashion, a whole 7 years before that term became the most overused quote in Who history, the Doctor has already met a future him in the previous story, and this is actually addressed, which is a nice detail. It's a fun introduction and Mark Ellis does well. Flynn, on the other hand, is introduced in medias res, as most of the Hoyle Doctor's companions were. She's sort of there already, a character who the Doctor talks to as though he's known her for ages. We've little sense of their history, little sense of how they met, but they do have a fun dynamic, and Susan Gibson plays the character very well. Then there's the Doctors themselves. I keep saying it, getting the Doctor right is half the battle. This is after all Doctor Who, not Star Trek, where if you hate Wesley Crusher you can still watch a Data episode and vice versa. If there is such a thing as a person who hates Data and loves Wesley Crusher, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Chris Hoyle is, by this point, a veteran of the craft. His Doctor is worldly, light but with steel, and you believe the impassioned pleas he gives when he's about to be shot to fucking death by the Daleks. Called in England, on his second outing, ironically after a turn as a future Doctor in A Stitch in Time, is lighter in some ways, harsher in others, quicker to anger and sharper tongued, and provides a very different energy. I can't rightly say whether either Doctor would have been better served being the sole Doctor of this affair, but on the flip side I can't rightly say that it's not satisfying watching a regeneration story that doesn't conform to what fan media has long since turned into the tired and worn out cliches of the post-regenerative episode. There are, as I say, always bits that are hit and miss. There's gore, some nasty wounds on Mr. Hoyle, and a poor TCE'd person getting smished, which can be a bit excessive and your mileage may vary as to whether you find this story padded. But, overall, this story delivers epic and grandiose adventure and is beautifully made, and I can heartily recommend watching it. I do not, however, heartily recommend watching the regeneration scene if you have a weak stomach, as this may be the only moment in Doctor Who visual media, to my knowledge, where we ever see Doctor Who upchuck.